In this video, I will discuss the problem identification and data intersections that have arisen when collecting data for my project on the Screencast-O-Matic videos. And my initial purpose for my project was designed to collect data on communicating with students who are not in the classroom due to absenteeism, in addition to creating videos that were supplemental resources that also live on Google Classroom. And then students would have the opportunity that even if they missed class, they were coming back to class the next time with their work done. They didn't need to physically meet with me, and that would be a successful step in their habits of work and preparation for learning than it has been in the past. And one of the pieces, while I was in the process of collecting data, one of the pieces that really stuck out to me was, although it wasn't the highest number per se in why students don't access Google Classroom frequently, it certainly wasn't the highest number out of all of them, but the lack of motivation to even have 8 students out of 34 say that they don't access Google Classroom frequently because they're not motivated really struck a chord with me, and that was what I used to focus my additional problem identification on, was the lack of motivation to access Google Classroom, which for me resulted in them not being able to access the videos I had posted even when they were actually there. So obviously it would make sense that the Spanish 3 students wouldn't be able to access my videos because I didn't post anything. But when students who had access to the videos through Google Classroom weren't actually accessing the videos, it was interesting to me that some of them chose the answer that they were not motivated to even check Google Classroom in the first place, which then becomes a bigger issue not only in my classroom for checking the videos, but a bigger issue school-wide because they're not checking Google Classroom for any of their assignments. So one of the things that I focused on was to kind of break down some reasons why this is happening. In the past, obviously, kind of the responsibility was put on students to have an assignment notebook and keep track of their assignments. And then, of course, if they didn't write it down, they couldn't complete it. But Google Classroom is a beautiful thing, and it communicates with parents. So parents have the option to provide their email and be notified when their students' work is due. And so that ability to say, I didn't really know that I had an assignment, both on the student end and on the parent end, isn't really there anymore. So you would think that students would have more motivation because the accountability is higher now, but it's not necessarily the case. And I'm not obviously not measuring it to motivation in the past, but even just hearing that now, that like with all the technology that we have, students and teachers being the one to post the assignments, it's not even on the students anymore to say, oh, gee, I copied that page number down incorrectly, so I couldn't do my homework, or, oh, I forgot to write it in my assignment notebook. That's not even on them anymore. So the responsibility is really to open up a new tab, on their browser and go to Google Classroom and check, and they're still not doing that. Some students said that they forgot. Some found that they didn't have the time. Some students said that they don't have a lot of classes that use Google Classroom, or if the course does use Google Classroom, they don't post many assignments to it. So there was a lot of different variables as to why this might be happening. So it kind of led to a few additional questions, and then some data intersections, and also that data that is needed. And a lot of the data is intersected, but I would still need a lot of data in order to answer the questions for this other problem. So the first question that I had come up with is, why is completing homework not a priority for students? That's what it feels like anyway. So I think that's a blend of demographic and perception data, and this could be collected through, for perception, it could be an informal conversation, and then the demographic piece, is it a certain grade level that is not completing their homework, or it's not a priority for, underclassmen, for example, because, they have 3 more years to graduate versus, students who are seniors, maybe it's obviously completing homework is a higher priority for them because they know a lot is riding on it because they're applying to colleges, for example. So that demographic piece and perceptual piece, to just kind of find out why. Like, why wouldn't you find this important? Or why are you not going to Google Classroom to check? So that was question number 1. And then the second question here is it comes back to the gender piece. Is it an issue primarily for males or females? So again, it's a demographic and perception piece. So obviously the demographic piece is pretty easy to collect through, a survey or something like that to find out, are males not checking Google Classroom or females not checking Google Classroom. But the perceptual piece also kind of connects to the motivation factor. And, if it's primarily males and they're not usually motivated until a little bit, or matured until a little bit later in their high school career, would that be a correlation? And then therefore, females would have a higher rate of prioritizing their homework, and, making homework a priority to check Google Classroom. So that would be another piece. And then taking a look at which grade level struggles with homework and if they've had an issue in the past. So that became not only demographic to find out which grade level struggles the most completing their homework and or accessing it on Google Classroom, but then taking a snapshot into their history of homework completion. And that would, not only is it a learning data, it would also be a connection, which I didn't mention on here, but it's also a connection to perceptions as well. It could be a conversation with former teachers, in addition to, any data collection in terms of, assignments that any former teacher might have on record as well. So that would be really interesting to find out, who struggles, but also is there a timeline associated with this as well? Have they only struggled through their middle school years? Did it go all the way back to this class as a whole, the way they function? They've always had a history, of struggling with, maybe following directions or, a step-by-step process or homework completion, or what kind of is the issue with that. And furthermore, if you had that kind of information, if these students, for example, weren't held accountable in the past for doing their homework, but could commit to working really hard in class, I suggested maybe you would think as a teacher to restructure to like a backward design model, to just focus on getting the work done in class and then not expecting homework, because they're much more apt to function well in class and be conscientious in class versus going home and trying to be held accountable or be reliable for the work outside of the classroom. And then the other questions The other question asked, what type of motivation could be offered to students who weren't athletes? This is a little bit of a struggle. So obviously a perception process data would need to be collected. Typically, students who are athletes are the ones who are more motivated because they know that eligibility is riding on whether or not their homework is completed and their habits of work. However, we don't really have a process in place for students who are not athletes and what happens to them if their habits of work score is low. So right now, it is essentially up to each individual teacher and how they want to handle it. So I think this is a two-part connection here as well, to find out from those students who aren't athletes what could motivate you. What is something that works well for you? And obviously that would kind of have to be on an individual basis. So maybe just an informal conversation would be fine, but something like, changing their Laker time or supervised study hall or having a working lunch, or maybe they work effectively staying after school, so that they don't end up with some sort of negative consequence, but so that you can honor the type of motivation that they need. And then in terms of process, again, we don't have a process in place to deal with students who aren't athletes, and it's kind of, arbitrary and up to each teacher to deal with it how you want. I typically just ask the student to stay after school for like an hour, and we work together on getting the work caught up for what they've actually missed and get them back on pace. But it almost feels like it's a detention. It's not. But at the same time, that's kind of the negative connotation that has. So I'm looking for input from the student and their buy-in to find out what type of motivation could we give them to be proactive instead of waiting until it has some sort of negative consequence. And then the next one is, what is the cause for not feeling motivated? Is there some sort of demographic piece, such as, someone in your family hasn't graduated, financial hardships, health, do they not have internet access? And that means feeling motivated in general, but also feeling motivated to get their homework done. And then, and that also kind of ties into the process data, because, we're trying to find out, we know what this could look like if it's fully implemented. If we focused on this problem, okay, now we're focusing on lack of motivation and accessing Google Classroom. Like, we know what the intended, what it would look like if it was fully implemented, but we kind of need to figure out how to address that. And so that kind of, that's where the demographic piece ties into it. Does demographic play a part in implementing the whole entire process? So, because sometimes, if you have a family member who didn't graduate from high school or didn't graduate from college, that makes it very difficult to then motivate their child to want to do homework or put, place importance or priority on education. And then the next one is, why are students saying that they do not have time to check Google Classroom? Again, this is a demographic perception piece. Which grade level is saying this, male or female? And kind of, again, a perceptual conversation that needs to happen to try and find out, why is this happening? And why is Google Classroom only being used for certain classes when it was supposed to be an initiative in high school? Again, this is demographics and process this time to find out which teachers are not using Google Classroom and which ones are, and if there's some type of correlation between the intended outcome, which is obviously for every teacher to use Google Classroom, and homework completion. So that would be the correlation between those two. And then, how does the lack of motivation in high school translate to difficulty or college in the workplace? obviously most jobs and